It is imperative that the New Orleans Saints use the next 8 games to fully evaluate the youth on their roster so that they can understand who they need to build their futures around. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at the New Orleans Saints laying the foundation for their future and the players they should do it around. We'll also take a look at the head coaching position. Should the New Orleans Saints hire an offensive, defensive, or special teams head coach? We're going to dive into that, including some of Mickey Loomis's comments on that very conversation. We'll also take a look at young offensive players that just simply need to get some opportunity here over the course of the next 8 games, and why Alontae Taylor will be the next New Orleans Saints star if they let him play where he should be playing, on the outside. This is the chance for Alontae Taylor and the New Orleans Saints to get that right. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listener, for being it every day or here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Go over to prizepicks.com, so it's Locked On NFL, or download the app and use the code in all lowercase Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. Well, if there's anybody that the New Orleans Saints should be looking at, especially over on the defensive side of the ball, to build their future around, in my opinion, the conversation has to start with cornerback Alontae Taylor. Now, if you tuned into yesterday's episode, the emergency episode, after Marshon Lattimore was traded, you've already heard me wax philosophic on Alontae Taylor a little bit. I'm going to do it a little bit more, but we're also going to take a look at 3 other players that I think deserve to be in a part of the conversation. But let me start with Alontae Taylor. When you look at what Alontae Taylor has done over the course of the last 2 years, the year-over-year improvement has been absolutely fantastic. Saints general manager Mickey Loomis doing his weekly radio show with WWL AM FM, WWL Radio on Tuesday evening, and he mentioned that Alontae Taylor hasn't, grown, but instead has taken a leap when it comes to whether he's playing on the outside or the inside. Talked about how consistent he is, which is something that they really value at that position. And of course, talked a lot about him just accepting the role and really just kind of dedicating himself to being the best player that he can be for this New Orleans Saints team. And I think we've seen that. You've heard my good friend John Hendricks and I from over at Second and Saints speak over and over and over again about how Alontae Taylor has been the most improved player. A lot of people kind of clap back at that because they open up Pro Football Focus and they look at the number of yards that he's surrendered. I get that. Alontae's got to get himself out of explosive plays and things like that. But the explosive plays that he has led up, or that he has been the closest defender to, have often come when he is guarding in the slot, when he's playing in the slot, when he's playing that nickel role. When he plays in the outside, he has been outstanding. 103 coverage snaps so far for him over on the outside as a wide corner. And according to my charting and others, 6 targets during that time, allowing just 3 catches for 63 yards. That's really, really good production for the young cornerback. So if you can get him back to where it was that he played all throughout his collegiate years, the things that made him draftable, feels like there's another potential Zach Bond situation here, right? The thing that made him draftable, how about have him do that thing? So with the New Orleans Saints trading away Marshon Lattimore to the Washington Commanders, with Paulson Adebo being done for the season with a broken femur, this is going to be, this next 8-game stretch, the absolute opportunity for Alontae Taylor to prove the tattoo in the back of his ear, right, that says I'm him, that is correct. I also want to take a look at a couple of other defenders. Now, here's my rule, all right? No first-year guys, and then no guys that have already put together fantastic seasons of that. We're going to dig into the offensive players here in a little bit. There'll be no Chris Olave on the list. There'll be no Rashid Shaheed on the list because you already know who they are. There'll be no Taliesin Fuang on the list because he was just drafted this season. So I want to start off with guys that are either undrafted rookies, or guys that have been selected and have been kind of working with the team and are young. So we discussed Alontae Taylor already. The next 2 players that I want to talk about are linebacker Anfernee Orji, who was a undrafted free agent rookie last season, as well as safety Jordan Howden. Let's start with Orji because he's the one that maybe doesn't get a lot of play in these conversations very often. He has been another one of those most improved players. Like if I had to look at most improved players for New Orleans from last year to this year, Alontae Taylor tops that list, but I would have to put Anfernee Orji up there as well. I think Trevor Penning's kind of toying around with that when we get over to the offensive side, but again, first rounder, you already know you're going to try to build around him anyway. Orji coming in as an undrafted free agent. And playing himself into a situation where he makes the active roster, spent the entire season last year on the practice squad, played his way into an active roster spot right at the beginning of the season throughout what he did in training camp, the development that he showed, and has constantly throughout the season been in on these excellent plays over and over again, whether he's crashing into the backfield, which we saw him do a lot come training camp, come the preseason, and during regular season games. His ability in special teams has been huge as well, like a special teams tackle almost every game for the first opening stretch of games. He is somebody that has put himself on the map, absolutely put himself on the map, and somebody that needs to be considered for his role. He's somebody that has kind of cross-trained in all three of the linebacker spots. So, if you end up looking for a guy that's going to be able to help you in place of Demario Davis, in place of the Sam linebacker, in place of Willie Gay Jr., in place of Pete Werner. He's a guy you can plug in anywhere at any point. So that maximizes his potential as well. I do think, though, if there's an opportunity over the course of the last 8 games to kind of find his spot and develop him in one role, it might be worth that opportunity. Sometimes teaching these guys like all these different positions is really great, but then eventually you kind of want to focus them down, don't you? So that you can kind of figure out what their trajectory is as a one position player and potential future starter. I want to dive into Jordan Howden or conversation around Jordan Howden. Howden's been an interesting player, right? Was kind of drafted to be this post safety or deep middle of the field safety, and then has had to play the box role because Marcus May was either suspended or hurt last season for the majority of it. And then this year, Will Harris Jr. ends up on injured reserve. Saints kind of have this clearly contentious relationship, I think, now with Jonathan Abram, based on some reporting from Nick Underhill over at New Orleans Football. And then so now you have a guy like Jordan Howden that has stepped into that more box safety role, hybrid deep safety role next to Tyrann Mathieu. I'm curious to see if Jordan Howden can be the guy behind Tyrann Mathieu or after Tyrann Mathieu as the deep safety. Now, what the Saints have been doing a lot lately is that they've been moving Tyrann Mathieu down to the box, which I think is really smart because he's very disruptive there. And he's been a little bit of an issue deep because of tackling concerns and things like that. So having Jordan Howden back deep has been something that they've been doing a little bit more. I think that works well in his wheelhouse, right? And we've seen him come up with an interception. We've seen him come up with, plays and things like that. So just want to see him continue to develop. I think the big thing with Jordan Howden is just not questioning himself and getting a little bit more fluid, getting a little bit more natural and trusting his instincts out on the field. Does a good job of not making the same mistake twice, but hasn't filtered through all the mistakes yet. So he's going to continue to make those. He's going to continue to grow. But Jordan Howden, somebody that this New Orleans Saints coaching staff is very excited about. And I think rightfully so. He's a very talented player, very smart, very able to articulate the game for himself, all these other things. I think all that's really important. And real quick, I'll give you a little lanyap here. Rico Payton, right? The undrafted free agent out of Pittsburgh State coming in this year as a rookie, struggled throughout training camp, but really came on through. Struggled throughout training camp, but really came on throughout the preseason. He's another guy you continue to get a look at. Shamar John Charles is another guy you get to take a look at, and other players. So let me know any other defensive players you think the New Orleans Saints should get a hard look at that could be building block pieces moving forward for this team. Coming up next, I want to dive into the offensive side, starting with the fact that the offensive players simply need more run, need more reps. And I want to lead our conversation off with a guy that those two statements could not be more true about, and that is undrafted free agent tight end Dallin Holker. Let's get to him next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Ultimate GM. If you remember our great partners over at Ultimate GM, well, they are back, and now they've added an amazing new game mode that I cannot wait to tell you about. The game that lets you step into the shoes of a football franchise general manager and lead it to glory now has a head coach career mode as well. So on top of getting to build your dynasty, drafting players, signing free agents, and hiring your coaching staff, you can also now call offensive plays during games as well. If you've already have it installed, just make sure you update it. If you haven't, make sure that you go and download it right now. And it's a must-have for football fans. I love it. I know that you will to Ultimate Pro Football GM is completely free, no ads, and is 100% playable offline. So you can play on the go as you want and when you want to. It's a great game for like planes and stuff like that. That's when I usually play it. So on top of that, let me give you a special offer just for you. Use the promo code Locked On NFL in all caps inside the game store, and you're going to receive a boost to your franchise. Make sure you get it because this is going to jumpstart your play and give you the advantage that you'll need and that you'll want in terms of creating your dynasty. So to download the game, just head over to ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store. That's Ultimate Pro Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. It's not you versus a bunch of mystery lineups that you can't see. It's you versus the house. It's you and your knowledge of your favorite players, favorite teams, favorite sport versus the projections that Prize Picks gives you. So, for instance, they might give you Travis Kelce, the Kansas City Chiefs, 59.5 receiving yards, Saquon Barkley, 79.5 rushing yards. You take both of those players, 2 to 6 in total, and you choose more or less than the Prize Picks projection. If you get 4 of those right, you can win up to 100 times your entry back. That's how easy it is. It's super fun. It's awesome. Go and check them out today. It is Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, that is the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Nope. Ooh, nope. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints have some young players on offense that they should absolutely be looking to get a look at over the course of the last 8 games as well. So I got some players for you to watch on that side of the ball as well. Now, again, I want to reiterate that we're not talking about guys that are already proven, right? You already know that you're building around Chris Olave, right? But I don't know if you're going to see him for the rest of the season. You already know that you're building around Rashid Shaheed, Taliesin Fuanga, Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz. Like, you already know that those guys are being built around as young players on your roster. But I think that there are other players that you should be getting a look at here over the last little bit. I'm going to mention real quick, Bub Means not on the list only because he's still in injury reserve for at least another couple of weeks. Once he's back, though, you know he's a part of the conversation. I can't think of a guy that's more happy to be a football player or to be alive at all than Bub Means. I think that he's definitely somebody that can have a major impact if he continues to develop. But let's take a look at some other players, and we're going to lead off with tight end Dallin Holker. We'll take a look next at Mason Tipton, the undrafted free agent wide receiver out of Yale. And then we'll take a look at undrafted free agent Jordan Mims, who was on the practice squad all last season, but has found his way back to the active roster here this year. So Dallin Holker is where I want to start. Dallin Holker was somebody that has been described to me that the New Orleans Saints inside their building were referring to as their 8th round draft pick. That's how much they really liked this guy coming in. Even though they signed him as an undrafted free agent, they still consider him somebody that could have been a draft pick. And a lot of teams that kind of had him on their board for whatever reason, because of the way that boards fell, trades, all these other things, they didn't draft him coming out of Colorado State. And Dallin Holker is a guy that you can do a lot of different things with. In fact, last week, when the Saints had a lot of injuries when it came to their wide receiver position, they're already without Bub Means, they're already without Rashid Shaheed. They lost Cedric Wilson for a little while. And then, of course, that very scary hit to Chris Olave. They ended up lining up Dallin Holker out wide because you can do that with him. You can also run him out of the backfield. You can also utilize him in line, in the slot, split out. Like, there's a lot of different things that you can do with him. The ability to be able to move him around as an offensive chess piece is something I'd like to see the Saints explore more over the course of the last 8 games. You have some talented tight ends. You saw the fantastic catch by Foster Moreau in the game against Carolina. Juwan Johnson is a guy that has consistently been able to make plays when targeted, but doesn't often get the targets, unfortunately. And then Dallin Holker now is somebody that you could see developing and growing in this system. So I think it's an opportunity for Clint Kubiak to get a little bit more creative, do some more interesting things. And Dallin Holker can be a very big part of that. You also have to admit that this tight end room, while it has some talent, is a room that needs to be built upon. So are you building around Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau for your future? Or are you building around Dallin Holker as a young player for your future? That's the question that you have to figure out, especially that latter part. But you're not going to figure that out unless the guy gets more opportunities, gets more reps, gets to be utilized in other ways, things like that. So I think that that's the next step for Dallin Holker, is just to be able to get more reps, get more opportunities, get more run so that he can be out there on the field, and utilizing him in a bunch of different ways so that you can figure out all the different ways that he might be able to contribute to you. How much longer do you have with Taysom Hill? I'm not saying that Dallin Holker can be Taysom Hill 1-to-1, but can he line up in the backfield and help you out there in addition to lining up at tight end and out wide? Maybe he's not somebody you turn around and hand the ball off to, unless you're close to the goal line, maybe. But can he be somebody that you can move around? I think that they should do a little bit more of that so they can get a better look at what they have there. Mason Tipton's another one that's really, really interesting, right? He was somebody that kind of lit the world on fire in training camp for a little while because of not only the plays that he was making downfield, but because of what he was doing as a route runner as a whole. Right now, he's got 14 receptions in the year for just 99 yards. And a lot of times his targets are coming from 20 plus yards downfield. The Saints have gotten back to, over the course of their season and everything, to being the team that oftentimes will just, rip it, right? And I think that obviously that's something that they could adjust. And it's definitely something, too, that for Mason Tipton, everything that we've been told about the guy is the fact that he's also a good route runner. But listen to his target distribution so far this season, right? He's been targeted 24 times. 6 of those targets are 20 plus yards downfield, 0 catches on those. He's been targeted 17 times between 0 to 9 yards. Good there, catching 14 of his passes, all 14 of his passes coming 0 to 9 yards. Only has 1 target in the intermediate area from 10 to 19 yards. Get him involved there. They spent all this time talking about how, it's not just what he can do deep, but he's also a really, really good route runner. And we're very pleased what he can be as a route runner and all these other things. Well, let the guy run some routes for you. Let him attack the middle of the field. Let him attack the intermediate area. Get him more involved in those areas where he might be able to have a greater impact for you, help you move the chains, all those other things. So right now, he's either been deep or right at the line of scrimmage, or sorry, not right at the line of scrimmage, but between the line of scrimmage and within 10 yards. Get him involved a little bit more in that intermediate area and see what you have in a guy like old Tipton, the undrafted free agent wide receiver out of Yale. And I want to wrap this list up taking a look at Jordan Mims, the running back. He was, formerly an undrafted free agent that signed with the Buffalo Bills. The Bills waived him at roster cuts. The Saints brought him onto their practice squad, spent most of the season last year on the practice squad, came back to the team in the offseason, and was one of those guys that maybe was like a little bit underrated all throughout training camp and stuff like that, but was doing enough to garner some attention. 6'1", 205, coming out of Fresno State. He's a guy that came in and then earned his way onto the active roster to begin the season. Now, of course, he was aided by injuries at the position, with Kendre Miller being on injured reserve and all those other things. Kendre Miller comes back for a couple of weeks. Jordan Mims gets moved on from. They bring him back because Kendre Miller's back on injured reserve. And then now he's gotten a little bit more opportunity. So I had 5 carries last week against Carolina for 13 yards. Not massive in terms of what he can do or in terms of what he was able to do in that game. But getting him more involved and figure out more of what you have from him, I think, will be a good thing for the New Orleans Saints. This isn't a position where you're like in massive need of a breakout young guy. You still have Alvin Kamara. You've given him the extension, stuff like that. You can kind of take your time. Saints could go right back to the draft pool at this position as well, but find out exactly how early you have to, how many, like what you have to look for and all those other things. See what you've got in the young Jordan Mims. So far, he's run up the middle 3, 4, 5 of his carries. He's run outside of the tackles on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of his, actually 1, 2, 3, 4 of his carries. So get him a little bit more involved in the outside zone run game and see what he can do for you there. And then, of course, there's always the guys that were drafted this year, some of the other guys that we mentioned. Those are 3 guys I'm really interested in seeing more of over the course of the final 8 games. And Jordan Mims' opportunities grow if Kendre Miller remains on injured reserve for an extended amount of time. But he certainly still has at least 3 games there. Can't come back into that New York Giants game, 2 games after the bye. All right, coming up next, should the New Orleans Saints go after an offensive head coach, a defensive head coach, or a special teams coach for their next head coach? I'll tell you why offensive head coach is the NFL's right choice. Special teams coach, though, might be the right choice. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, where right now you can tackle the NFL season because at this moment, new customers are going to be able to put down a $5 bet and get $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. FanDuel Sportsbook app has everything that you need all in one nice, tidy little place for you to be able to get in on live bets on the NFL all in one place and much more. You can even get a hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out live stats. You can check out play-by-play, all in the same place where you place your bets. Speaking of bets, New Orleans Saints, that line keeps creeping up. The era of Riz starting off as underdogs, 3.5-point underdogs at home up against the Atlanta Falcons. You can get in on that and much more at FanDuel.com. Just check it out there to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Go and check them out today at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints are in need of a new head coach, and I think going for a defensive head coach is what they should avoid. We appreciate you very much for being here. I just want to tell you real quick, we've got everything covered for you. Marshon Lattimore trade, bonus episode. Alontae Taylor's future with the team, got that covered. Head coach fired, got that covered. Darren Rizzi hired, or promoted rather, got that covered. We got you here over a Locked On Saints. And we still have the crossover for tomorrow's episode. We'll dive into the game a little bit more on Friday while also continuing to keep our eyes ahead to what this New Orleans Saints franchise is doing. If you want more, you join the Locked On Saints Insider program. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later as well. All right, so offensive, defensive, or special teams coach for the New Orleans Saints when it comes to their next head coach. And what we're talking about here necessarily is like the focus, right? What is their focus and where are you hiring from? Are you hiring an offensive coordinator or former offensive coordinator? Or having a defensive coordinator, former defensive coordinator, special teams, that whole thing. I maintain that special teams coordinators are the perfect hire for interim head coaches. That's why Darren Rizzi was the right choice. Relationship with everybody on the team. He's an assistant head coach, so he even got some time with quarterbacks and all that stuff. Has a relationship with all the young players on the team, the guys we're talking about evaluating for the rest of the season. Perfectly logical. But where do the Saints go next when it comes to their long-term head coach? Now, Darren Rizzi is going to earn his opportunity to be considered. They interviewed him already in 2022 before they hired Dennis Allen. They'll interview him again here in 2025 or going into 2025. But ultimately, what I think the Saints should avoid is another defensive head coach. Unless it's Brian Flores. There's always the one coach that's going to be the exception. I think Brian Flores is the exception. But going back to somebody you're familiar with, like Aaron Glenn, it doesn't move the needle enough that you go for the defensive head coach. Brian Flores is unique enough that you'll kind of make the exception there. But I would avoid the defensive head coach. I think going for the offensive head coach or the special teams guy who is effectively, typically, neither an offensive or defensive play caller, but is just your figurehead as a head coach, could also be the right way to go. That's where I think the Saints need to go, either one of those directions. The NFL says that offensive head coaches is the way to go. I want to read a quote from Mickey Loomis's visit at WWL Radio talking about exactly this. He mentioned that a couple of years ago, or really, years ago, there's a period of time where, quote, you have to go with a defensive guy to be head coach. He also went on to say that that was important. And then it became, particularly in the last 10 years, I got to get an offensive guy because, the offensive, he talks about like the passing game becoming the biggest thing. So that's what you've seen in terms of the most recent trend. But then he goes on to close out his comment with this, quote, so it's all cyclical, but it seems to shift back and forth between offense and defense and doesn't really seem to include special teams coordinators, and it probably should. So let me entertain that for a moment. Why has the shift gone towards the offensive head coach? Why should it include the special teams head coach? The reason why the NFL has shifted towards the offensive head coach is, as Mickey Loomis said, because it is an offensive league, right? The passing game has become very important. You need guys that can scheme that, play drawers, play writers, play callers. You need those guys. However, there is a logistical side to this as well. We did an insider Zoom call with all the Locked On Saints insiders Tuesday afternoon, right after the live show that we did after the Marshon Lattimore trade. And I was asked this question and I kind of waxed philosophic on it for a little while. And here's my kind of like logistic approach, the offensive play caller head coach. The reason why it's a positive. if you get an offensive coordinator that comes out and calls one season of good games, that offensive coordinator is about to become a head coach, right? And so you're having to overturn and you're creating inconsistency in your success, not your failures, in your success is creating inconsistency in terms of new offensive coordinator, new offensive coordinator, new offensive coordinator, new offensive coordinator. So now you see teams do things like Saints did with Sean Payton, Kyle Shanahan with the San Francisco 49ers, Sean McVay with the Los Angeles Rams, so on, so forth, so on, so forth. And you have the head coach that calls the offensive plays, and you hire the offensive wonderkind, or you hire the offensive guru, or whatever, the quarterback whisperer, or whatever that calls plays to be your head coach. That way he ain't getting hired away as no head coach anymore. And then you build consistency and you're able to have both success when you can find it and consistency when you have found it. So that's why I think that the offensive head coach is the right way to go in today's NFL. But boy, do I love the special teams coach. They're typically hard-nosed. They're typically more demanding. They're typically more forceful. They're typically someone that has experience building a relationship with everyone on the roster. People forget that that was Bill Belichick's background, just for instance there. So when you look at what you can have with a special teams coach, you're looking at a different area, right? You have the special teams coach come in and become the head coach, but then you're going to have the offensive coordinator that calls plays and the defensive coordinator that calls plays. And then if you succeed, your offensive coordinator gets hired away, and then boom, you're replacing them with another offensive coordinator and another offensive play caller. So it does create, as we mentioned, that inconsistency despite success. So that's why I think that offensive play caller makes sense. That way you avoid that. But special teams coaches deserve the love because they are the culture builders. They are the player coaches that can walk the line of being the authoritarian, telling you not just how to be coached, but or not just coaching you, but telling you the truth. And I think that that's a big thing that a lot of players crave, not need in terms of like, oh, they're divas or whatever, but they want that. Players want to be coached. Players want to be told the truth. And a lot of special teams coordinators are really accustomed to telling the truth because you talk about margin of error. The special teams guys, every unit, slim margin of error. So there's no time to be messing around or not paying attention or not doing your job or whatever. Darren Rizzi talks all the time about the 111th, right? You're one of 11 and all 11 have to do their job. And it kind of harkens back to, again, Bill Belichick, special teams focus, do your job. I respect that in coaching. I respect that in these special teams coaches as well. So I do think that guys like Rizzi, guys like other special teams coaches out there do deserve to be more a part of these coaching hire decisions. But I understand why going after an offensive head coach is really, really important from a logistical turnover standpoint. No doubt about that. All right, I want to wrap up with a couple of extra little things here. The New Orleans Saints getting some shuffling on their practice squad. They brought back offensive lineman Kyle Hergel. We knew that they were going to bring him back. He's a guy that they really liked. They get him back. And then they ended up terminating the practice squad contract of Nico Lalos in order to do that. Nico Lalos gets almost immediately replaced as well on his practice squad by the signing Trajan Jeffcoat. You remember that name from the preseason, not really the preseason, but actually training camp, mini camp, stuff like that. Somebody had started off with some impressive stuff, dislocated his elbow in the second day of training camp, was in excruciating pain, had to be carted off the field. Very unlucky situation there, but we knew the Saints would want him back. Now that he's healthy and cleared, he is indeed back on the practice squad. That is per KPRC's Aaron Wilson. And then one other move came from Jeremy Fowler over at ESPN, the signing of running back Xavier Valladay. So you're going to see that name Xazavian, according to pronunciation guides. Xavier, we'll see a little bit more. He does go by X though. So X Valladay, 5'11", 204-pound running back that runs bigger than he is, really good with yards after contact, very patient, but also extremely decisive in the outside zone run game. Not really a dynamic breakaway athlete, according to scouting reports, but we'll see what we see from him if we get an opportunity to see anything from him. He is also being added to the practice squad. So some practice squad shuffling for the New Orleans Saints. All right, I mentioned the insider program. Now's the time, right? Head coaching search. Players get traded away, evaluation process on the way, stuff like that. We're going to have a lot of honest conversations with folks in the locker room. If you want to get that stuff first, join the Locked On Saints Insider program. You can text Who Dat to 504-285-7473. That's 504-285-7473 to join, or you can click the link in the description, whether you're watching or you're listening. You can get started. Zoom calls. I want to try to start doing those weekly. Film studies, things like that as well. So go ahead and check out the Insider program so you can get a little bit more, especially right now with all the news that's going to be circulating. I want to keep you up to date on all of it. Rumors, all of it. I'll tell you what to believe, what not to believe, all that good stuff. If you're an insider, you also got a little bit of a head start. News on the Marshon Lattimore trade, on the Dennis Allen firing, all those other things. So definitely worth your time. All right, y'all. Appreciate you very much for being here with us and making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, make sure you're going to check out Locked On NFL. Tomorrow, crossover Thursday, myself and Aaron Freeman. So we'll turn our focus over to the game coming up as well. But I'll try to get a second kind of quick bonus episode for you post-practice. And our first kind of in-practice media availability with Darren Rizzi will be on Wednesday as well. So we'll have all that for you in tomorrow's episode on Thursday. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. Trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.